What is art? I mean, really, it sounds like a simple question, right? But it's actually this huge philosophical puzzle that has had brilliant people scratching their heads for centuries. So today, let's just dive right in. We're going to explore why this question is so darn tricky and what trying to answer it reveals about how we see the world.
Okay, to really get this, we've got to travel back in time a bit. Picture this. It's 1964. You've got two boxes. One is your standard everyday Brillo soap pad box you'd grab off a supermarket shelf. The other was made by Andy Warhol. Here's the kicker. They look exactly the same, identical. But one is just packaging. The other, it's a famous piece of art that's worth a fortune. So what gives? How is that even possible?
To bring this into our world, imagine an artist today makes a fake Amazon box. I mean, a perfect copy. The one that gets dropped on your doorstep, that's just cardboard, right? But the one in the art gallery, that could be a masterpiece. So there's this invisible line, this something that separates the two. What is it? And that right there, that's the central question that keeps philosophers up at night. It's the core puzzle of a field called aesthetics, which is basically the philosophy of beauty and art. It all boils down to this. What is the magic ingredient that turns an ordinary object into a work of art? So, let's dig into this problem a little bit more using that Brillo box as our guide. What makes this whole thing so confusing? Okay, so how have people tried to solve this? Well, one of the big ideas is what's called the proceduralist view, and the name kind of gives it away. It argues that the answer isn't in the box itself, but in the process, the procedure, and the context that it's in. This leads us to something called the institutional theory. The idea is pretty simple, actually. Something becomes art when the art world says it is. And who's the art world? Well, it's the artists, the critics, the people who run the galleries and museums. They're like the cultural gatekeepers who get to bestow the title of art on an object. And if you think about it, this totally solves our Brillo box problem, right? Warhol's box is art because the art world put it in a gallery and said, yep, this is art. The one in the supermarket, it never got that seal of approval. It's a neat, clean solution. Or is it? Yeah, not so fast. Critics were quick to point out a pretty big hole in this logic. It's kind of circular. Think about it. Art is what the art world says is art. Okay, but what defines the art world? People who deal with art. See the problem? It's like a snake eating its own tail. It doesn't really give us a solid foundation.
So to get around that circular problem, another idea popped up, the historical definition. This one says something is art if the artist intends for it to be part of the ongoing conversation of art history. So even when Jackson Pollock started his wild drip paintings, which were totally radical, he was still presenting them as paintings. He was adding his voice to a conversation that had been going on for centuries.
But this also has a bit of a snag. I mean, it's a fair point, but what about the very first art, the cave paintings? What historical art were they referring back to? It kind of creates this chicken and egg problem, you know? All right, so if looking at the context or history has its issues, maybe we're looking in the wrong place. The next big theory, called functionalism, takes a totally different approach. It doesn't care about where art comes from. It cares about what art does. So this is functionalism in a nutshell. Something is art if its main job, its function, is to give you an aesthetic experience. Now that sounds super academic, but it's really not. It's just that special feeling you get when you're hit by something beautiful or powerful or just cool. You're not thinking about what it's for, you're just appreciating it for what it is. And you've totally felt this before. It's that feeling of awe when a piece of music just gives you goosebumps. Or when you're so sucked into a movie or a book that the real world just melts away. Or even just standing in front of a painting and thinking, wow. According to functionalists, that feeling, that's the whole point of art. But of course, there's a problem here too. What about a gorgeous sunset or a majestic waterfall? They can definitely give you a powerful aesthetic experience, but we don't call them artworks, do we? They're nature. So maybe this definition is a little too wide. It seems to be missing a key ingredient, human intention. Okay, so we've looked at theories based on context and theories based on function, and they both seem to have some pretty big holes. After running into these dead ends, some philosophers basically threw their hands up and said, hold on, what if we're asking the wrong question entirely? Maybe the whole idea of finding one single neat definition for art is just impossible. Maybe art is just too big, too weird, too constantly changing to ever fit inside one little box. This is where the philosopher Wittgenstein comes in with a really cool idea called family resemblances. He said, think about the word game. What makes something a game? I mean, you have chess, soccer, solitaire, video games, but they don't all share one single thing in common. But they're connected by this whole web of overlapping features. Maybe art is just like that.
And this leads to what's called a cluster account. So instead of having one strict rule, picture a checklist of things we often associate with art. It has aesthetic value, it expresses emotion, it takes skill to make, it's original, that kind of stuff. For something to be art, it doesn't need to tick every single box, but it needs to tick enough of them to be part of the art family. And that's a really flexible way to think about it, which helps explain why art is so incredibly diverse.
So, okay, this has been a really fun philosophical rabbit hole to go down. But I bet you're thinking, so what? Who really cares about this stuff outside of a philosophy class? Well, it turns out this debate actually has massive, real-world implications.
I mean, how we answer this question, what is art, determines what you see in a museum. It decides what's taught in art history classes. It even influences which creative projects get government funding. These aren't just abstract ideas. They literally shape the entire cultural world around us. And it affects you personally, too. Seriously. If you have a really narrow, rigid definition of what art is, you might just shut the door on some incredible experiences. You could miss out on the beauty of street art, or the storytelling in a video game, or the power of performance art, all because it doesn't fit into a neat, old-fashioned box.
So, when all is said and done, is there one perfect answer? Probably not. But digging into these different ideas, the institutional, the historical, the functional, it's not about finding the right answer. It's about getting a new set of tools to see and appreciate the world in a richer, deeper way. The debate will go on, for sure. But the real question is, now that you've seen the puzzle from all these angles, what are you going to call art?